Good morning, folks. Hope everybody's doing well. It's a beautiful Wednesday morning out there. We're 4 weeks away from spring, so lots of positive happening. I'm happy about that. We're just actually waiting for Brian to get in. My assumption is he's having a little problem from the studio because I know he would be in the studio right now, getting prepared for his show, but obviously having maybe a couple of little difficulties, but we'll certainly, as soon as he comes in, we will see him and we'll get on with the show implemented. And look who's here. My buddy, our friend from the radio world, the sphere that we never get to see his face, but we always get to hear his voice, Mr. Brian Bourke. How are you this morning, Mr. Bourke? As soon as you're
here. There we go. Not too bad. Sorry, I got a call from the Canadian ambassador to France that I had to take. So,
well, of course.
Actually, it's not the Canadian ambassador to France. It's my old co-host, Jeff Lumby, who moved to France during the pandemic, but I call him the Canadian ambassador to France. So,
well, that's interesting. I actually had a son who moved to Ireland during the pandemic. So,
what a sensible thing to do.
Well, yeah, well, from a weather perspective, yes, he has no snow and he's in Southern Ireland. So it's about, 6 or 7 degrees at the coldest time of the year. So, yeah, he's having fun and enjoying it very much. But so how are you?
I'm good. I tried to move to Barbados, but seriously, I applied for the Barbados Barbados passport and I got one. And then this company here wouldn't let me do the show from Barbados, which I thought was very selfish.
Well, especially given the times now, you can do the show from anywhere.
Yeah. It's actually relatively simple. It's a little easier when you're in the studio because we have the monitors that, show the names of the phone callers and things like that. So that makes it a little bit simpler. But we could set that up at home too. It just requires a little bit more technology, but we're a technology company, so you'd think we'd be able to handle that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning, and thank you, Brian. Brian comes with actually 39 years of history, and we get to talk about that as history now, not as 39 years of work, because now much of it is history. But 2.5 years ago or so, he left politics. He was a counselor for the city of Waterloo. He left politics behind and decided to jump back into radio, and started hosting Kitchener Today back in September of 2018. And I think what certainly has been, from my perspective, Brian, is you've kind of brought that voice or sense of reason to talk radio, where it's not all about agreeing with people. And I remember hearing a show a week or so ago where you were saying, everybody's entitled to their opinion and everybody's entitled to not agreeing with everyone's opinion, but it's about dialogue, and the more dialogue that we have together and talk about issues together, the better resolve we'll have at the end of the day when decisions have to be made.
Well, and it's a funny thing because so I spent some time on council. I spent some time with United Way as well. And one of the things that struck me was that we are constantly having, discussions about these problems. But guess what? The problems never seem to go away. We never seem to actually fix them. Here we are in one of the richest countries of the world, and people still go hungry. Here we are. We have access to absolutely everything, and some people still go uneducated. So we talk a lot about it, but we don't ever seem to find any solutions. And that's one thing that I kind of try to continually push, that, we need to start getting beyond just talking about things and actually let's open it up. Let's see what's out there. Let's see what's possible. Let's not keep doing the same things because of the vastly compelling reason we've always done that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's, we look at the United States and we see that, that political divide is becoming so great in the United States. It's almost impossible now to build a bridge big enough between the two of them. But, you have to think that the vast majority of people kind of sit in that valley right in the middle. And I think, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Most people are kind of, I call it the sane center. Most people are kind of in the sane center, where they understand that the economy is important and capitalism probably, feeds that system to be able to deal with the other side of the equation, which is helping people who are less privileged or are not able to help themselves. So I think most of us kind of fit in that middle. But do you think that we see that divide because we're always just a few years behind what's happening in the United States? Do you see that divide happening in Canada as well?
Well, I think we're wrong if we think we're a few years behind the United States. We're not a few years behind. We're almost right there with them. The thing is that it's so easy for everything to be amplified now. So if you're on the extreme right or the extreme left, there are so many loudspeakers and megaphones available to you that it's really easy to get your point of view out. Damn the facts. Let's not let those get in the way. But it's just so easy to amplify that today. I'm with you. I think most people, I don't even think people are right or left. I think
Mhm.
people, when they send their tax dollars off to a city or a province, want to make sure they're well taken care of and are more than happy to help other people if they're in a position to do so. So, and I think the vast majority of people don't want to force their personal religious views on anybody else. But we have these extremes, and they're really, really loud. And there are people who tell me ignore the extremes, don't talk to those people. But I think you have to pull those people out because, to be honest, there's nothing that I like that grows in the dark. The only thing that I know that grows in the dark is mushrooms, and I hate mushrooms. So there's nothing. I think you shine a light on thing, you get somewhere.
Yeah, it's I think it's so fascinating. You sat on municipal government, I sat on municipal government. And it always kind of frustrated me when I would go to a meeting and I'd hear some of my colleagues talk around the issue of the night or, whatever was going to happen that night. They'd already made their decision and they hadn't heard all of the arguments from both sides of the equation. And I can remember saying to some of them, well, yeah, you haven't. How can you do that? These poor people are coming to city council and they're standing at the podium and they're going to give us their view or their opinion, but it seems they're wasting their time because you've already made up your mind. And I understand that council members, they get all this vast amount of knowledge and information prior to the case being adjudicated before them. But the fact of the matter is, I think most people expect, as an elected official making decisions that you might be involved with, you would at least be listening to the opinions and trying to come up with a solution that best meets everybody's interests.
Well, that's the really frustrating part. And when you're on council, you're only one voice. So that's difficult to kind of cobble everybody together. I do remember having the discussion on council about leaf collection in Waterloo, which I had a discussion about it yesterday too. And I still think it's the most insane program than any city. Why are we collecting leaves? Why do we do this? Because we all know they're better for your garden. We all know if you mulch them, you're better off. And we have systems in place that can take care of those excess amounts of leaves. So why do we run a program that was put in place 50 years ago? Well, the best answer I've been able to come up with is we run it because we always have. Well, okay, but couldn't we think a little bit differently? Um, when people come to council, and it's rare, people don't come to council nearly as much as they should. They're very passionate about what they're talking about, and you need to listen and need to consider that. Okay, how did they get there, and what can I take from what they're saying that can maybe inform my viewpoint a little bit more? I don't honestly think that you're on council to service your agenda. There might be things you're interested in. For example, giant sculptures of animals, I would be deeply in favor of on council. I'm not making that up. Um, but I can't have giant sculptures of animals above all other things. I think you just have to take the opportunity to inform your viewpoint, and then do what you can to maybe leave the place a little bit better than when you got it.
Yeah. Trump started the thing, about the fake news and really kind of bashed every credible um, media outlet that existed in the world, and relied more on the more credible news feed that he saw on Twitter as the real driving source of truth. You had you talk about this a lot on your show, about the fact that media to some degree, to a great degree, is getting a bad rap. It's an industry that seems to be kind of falling apart, and it seems to be falling apart because, in fact, I think you talked about it yesterday about, where do you get you don't go to buy a newspaper anymore. You read it online, and then you parlay that with the fact that, some of these stories are being pulled out of these newspapers and fed out, in Facebook, and then being twisted because people are taking them and twisting the viewpoints. How could we possibly ever get back to a more fact-based media driver and news feed for everybody?
Well, and what I do say on the air often, Greg, is that this industry is responsible for a lot of what has happened. And I don't I don't blame the reporters or the writers or the broadcasters or people like that. But I do blame a system that has knocked it down to a very, very large ownership places, there was a time in this business where every radio station was required to provide a certain amount of news per week. 3 hours and 15 minutes is one amount that stands out to me from my time in management. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's, as I do some quick math in my head, 28 minutes a day. So that's 9 3-minute long newscasts. Well, you're not required to do that anymore. So a lot of radio stations don't have any news staff whatsoever. They don't go out to council meetings. They don't engage with people publicly. And as a result, we're down almost to single sources. And I don't think that's ever healthy. And on a national basis, that's even more of the case. That when you have an organization like Canadian Press, which feeds most of the newspapers and broadcast outlets in this country, it's provincial and national news, that's a single source. And that's not good either. So I think we need to do a better job. And although the industry has adapted in a lot of ways to the digital model and the digital universe, we have to find some new ways to do things to generate that revenue. And it's not enough. And by the way, I'm on record as opposing any handout to media companies in this country. So it's not enough to do that. It's how do we get people to go back and look at the things that we're producing? And there is always a balance in this business between entertainment and information. Um, because while it may be really important for you to see the nuts and bolts of the city of Waterloo's water pipe budget, it's a pretty good chance you're not going to care that much. That's just the way things go. So we always have to find that balance. But because we've got fewer and fewer people covering things at the very source, we have fewer moments where the rest of the people can find what they need. And it's odd because we're in an age where information is easier to come by than ever before, yet we don't seem to be able to get everybody on board the way they were 40 years ago. Mostly, I think, because there's just so much information coming at us, we've all become headline readers.
Yeah, exactly, isn't it? And as you well know, being in the industry, uh, that's one of the most important things from a newspaper perspective. The editors, they battle over that headline. How do we get that headline? Because that's that big stop sign, right? It's the big thing that catches you, and then it would force you to kind of read that article. And so, we see that on the internet all the time, that these so-called journalists that are on the internet they're flashing this information and getting people to read their content because they're concentrating on what is that headline. And oftentimes the headlines don't even match what the story is all about.
Well, and I think one of the things that's really struck me in the last couple of years is, okay, so your local newspaper has a paywall, and it's, I don't even know what it is, $5 a month, let's say, and nobody's willing to pay for that content. Yet you'll happily pay $13.99 a month for Netflix. You'll happily pay $12.99 a month for Disney Plus. Why? Because you feel that content has value. So that's the answer, right? It is a consumer-driven business, and like any other consumer business, as you and the rest of the chamber knows, If your product isn't appealing to people, if they don't find a use and value to it, they're not going to purchase your product. And that's where the issue is. How you fix it is entirely different, of course.
Well, I think, I think you're in the right end of the business, in the talk show business, because I think this is where people can come on, and I've heard you before, people coming on with some crazy ideas, and you handle it so well. You allow them to have their voice, but at the same time, you let them down easy, in some ways, and you really are saying to the more centrist listener, hey, that person's entitled to their opinion. Their opinion might be way out here and, somewhere with the perseverance on Mars. But they're entitled to their opinion. I think that's a delicate balance in doing the job that you do, because quite frankly, I hear some of them, Brian, and I'd like fly off the handle. Like there are some crazy people with some crazy ideas.
And let me just be clear: you're entitled to your opinion as long as it's based on fact. So I always like to add that to the end of it, because people will say things like, "Well, I'm entitled to opinion." Well, if your opinion is that carrots are multicolored, are plaid, yes, you can have that opinion, but your opinion is wrong because it's just simply not true. So opinions are allowed always if they're based on fact. And we can look at the things the prime minister has done and dressing in blackface and all the other stuff that's gone on. And my opinion might be, that's a really stupid thing to do. And I'm hopeful that he has learned from that. Someone else's opinion is going to be based on the same set of facts, that he is a worthless human being and I cannot ever support him again. Okay, that's fair because we're coming at it based on the same amount of facts. I have to defend my stance at some point. That's fair too. But everything's got to be fact based. And I spent an awful lot of time for a long number of years trying to debunk things that I see on the internet, and there are a variety of things that I think we're all probably familiar with. And after a while, it's just too exhausting. I just can't do it anymore. There's so much. So I always add that yes, you're entitled to an opinion, but it's got to be based on fact.
Yeah.
And that's not a really hard line to draw anymore, because there's a lot of stuff out there that is not based on fact.
Mhm.
And it's a difficult time.
Yeah.
And the longer we go along with this, the harder it's going to be to make decisions on those big issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah, and speaking of that, fact, uh, every level of government in Canada says that they're dealing with the pandemic and situations are based on fact and science and medical information. How would you grade the effectiveness of all levels of government in dealing with the pandemic?
That's because we keep saying this. We've never been through this before. I've been on the air for over 40 years. I've never seen a situation like this before. I think they have missed some things, and in a couple of years' time, when we get a chance to look back, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we said, the whole idea of locking down this and locking down that may not have been the best idea, but at the time, they didn't know. And when I look at the media briefings of Doug Ford and the Prime Minister, look, I genuinely believe that they would like the pandemic to end yesterday. I don't have any doubt about that. But I think navigating a situation where you really have no idea what might happen next is exceedingly difficult, and we'll only be able to make a judgment on this, I think, when we come out of it and we see what this looks like, and we see what the economic carnage is and the personal carnage that's out there. Then we can take a look at it and go, well, yeah, we could have done this better and could have done that better, but I just think that's really hard to do in the moment.
Yeah, I think you're right. And from the chamber's perspective, we hear these. I can remember back in March and April and May, the like inundated with phone calls and emails and sad stories. Um, but what has kind of to some degree surprised me is the resilience of the local entrepreneur. Maybe it's just our region. And this is not to say in 100% of the cases. We've lost some businesses, absolutely. But, I look at some of our businesses and think, my goodness, like these people are way smarter than I am, way more capable than I am because they've been able to wiggle through and navigate to at least this point. I don't know how much further they can go. I don't know how much further they could go with pain from lockdowns and those kinds of things. But I have been a bit surprised at how well the entrepreneur, basically in a broad version, has handled the pandemic.
Well, and I am a business owner. I own a really small percentage of my daughter's business, which is Oxford Learning Center in Waterloo. And, they had to pivot almost immediately. They're a business that was completely based on the idea of being in person and exchanging one-on-one, two-on-one with kids. And when everything happened last March, of course, bang, it's gone. And the company did not have a plan to go online for learning again because it was based on that one-on-one contact. But they found a way to do it within 2 weeks. And yes, they lost some customers. They got some new ones back and have managed to survive. It's certainly not the steady, growth revenue that we've seen over the past 10 years since we first owned it. But it is survivable for the time being. And I think just an awful lot of people were able to do that. Certainly much more difficult in the hospitality sector than I think anywhere else. So that's been, I think, a real challenge. But the people that I know in the restaurant business now, a lot of them have been around for quite some time, so perhaps they're in a better shape at that point. But yeah, I've been pretty impressed with the way everybody has done whatever they can to kind of hang on until hopefully in the next few weeks things start to open up a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to that. We were just talking about that before you came on about my partners in crime, Ian McLean and Tony Lamantia and Ian Klugman. We're trying to get the message out to businesses that we need to up our game. We can't do exactly the same thing we did in the fall because that led to a lockdown. So when we come out of lockdown, we need to do something better to avoid what happened in December. And that might be, double masking, doing some of the things that are maybe more important to make sure it doesn't spread in the workplace. But I think there's no doubt about it that we're not just at the fatigue level, we're at the critical level for businesses that we need to do whatever we can to avoid falling into that trap again of oh well, things seem to be fine, because we know things aren't fine yet until we all get vaccinated, or until 75% of us get vaccinated. So I just hope that people don't let their guard down on this, especially with some of the variants coming out.
Yeah, honestly, I've said this many times. I don't believe that people are letting their guard down. Look, I'm out at the boardwalk every day. There are more cars in the boardwalk today than there were in the early parts of January. So obviously, people are out more. But everywhere I go, people wearing masks, people staying as far away from others as they possibly can. So I think everybody is doing what they can.
Right.
And hopefully we will continue to do that. I never even saw, honestly, Greg, a mad rush in the summertime to have huge numbers of people together. Now, maybe that's because of my age group, but we were certainly careful all summer long and into the fall. And, this is, and I'm no doctor, but this is maybe perhaps the natural progression of, again, a thing that all of us have never been through before.
Yeah, 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 for sure. What has been your best interview through the pandemic?
Oh my God. I did have a guy on named Vlad who was an anti-masker, and a very vehement one who I nicknamed Vlad the Inhaler just because I thought it was funny. So I think the one that actually sticks with me more than anything else was a man by the name of Jason Kindrachuk. He's the Canada Research Chair in Viral Diseases. And I talked to him in January of last year, just about 2 or 3 days after my wife and I had gotten back from Cuba, because we had left on the 18th of January and then returned on the 25th. And when we came back to Pearson on the 25th, we noticed, wow, there's an awful lot of people wearing masks who weren't doing that before. And I have been to Taipei, and I've been to a few other places where masks are actually fairly common. And that really struck me. And then that combined with the fact that the place we were in Cuba had a resort just down the beach that was largely populated by citizens of Germany and Italy. And there was a sickness that went through that resort. Almost everybody got sick, respiratory issues, all of the symptoms that we have now come to recognize as being COVID-19. And it was later on confirmed that that resort was just awash with it, people who had traveled from Germany and Italy, which are having a bigger problem at that time. So I talked to Jason in late January, and it was at that point that I think that it really hit home that this is not going to be a normal year, because he's moved on to do a variety of. And the interesting thing about it, I was talking to him when he was in Kenya. He was working on an Ebola task force of all things, and was just wrapping up quickly in order to get home so we could start to deal with this virulent disease. So that to me was the most interesting part, the part where it really came home that this was going to be very, very different.
Yeah, boy, was it ever different. As you said, something we never, ever, ever have experienced and never thought we'd ever experience. Do you think there's going to be an election this spring?
No, I think earliest possible scenario would be September. I don't think, given what's happened with the supply of vaccines, I don't think that the Trudeau government looks at it as this is the perfect opportunity to win an election. If vaccinations go the way they're supposed to and we build up this protection and the cases are down, then I can see in September maybe saying, oh, look what we did. We got you through a pandemic. Let's go have an election.
Yeah.
I just can't possibly see it before September at the earliest, more than likely November.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think back when in December when the vaccine started to come early, I think the Trudeau government thought at that point, hey, you know what, might be a good idea for us to look at a spring election. But I think, given the problems that they've had and the bashing that they've had over it, which, you know, who really knows whose fault it is? It's, people are manufacturing vaccines. If there's none there to deliver, there's none there to deliver. But in any event, I think things changed over the last month or so, and I think they're looking at an ideal time of being when we do have herd immunity. But I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, Brian, because I always find people like you, because I love the humor that you bring on your show, Kitchener Today, and I think that, from my perspective, you don't make light of things, but you make light of life, that we need to be a little less serious and a little more fun. And, I think that's really important. So if you could be, because I know you have a penchant for your dog, who is a therapy dog, and I know you just love that animal, but if you could be any animal, what would that be?
I love that dog primarily because I'm matrimonially required to love that dog. So I just want to point that out. If I could be any animal, I don't know. I think I would like to be a sloth, just because let's just slow things down and enjoy the view.
Very good. Your favorite superhero?
My favorite superhero. I see. I was one of those kids who was a Superman kid, because we used to own a variety store in Clearwater, British Columbia. Which, if you go nowhere and turn left, it's about an hour from nowhere. And we but we always used to get the new comic books on Sunday, and our parents would let us go into the back of the store and read them. So I always really got into Superman at that point, because you're all powerful unless you can make a mistake and go, oh damn it, that rock's green. That's not good for me.
You and your wife, are passionate travelers. You love to travel. You've been to many places around the world, but what place haven't you been to that you'd love to travel to?
I always wanted to go to Russia, and my wife would never hear of it for some reason. So that's still a place that I think would be really fascinating to visit. We've done the ones that we needed to do, and by that I mean the ones that kind of reflect our own heritage, because my parents were both Irish. My wife's parents were Dutch, so we've seen the Netherlands, we've seen Ireland, and my wife told me years ago that if we didn't go to Greece, we'd get divorced. So we covered that one. The main ones are out of the way. So yeah, Russia's always been of interest to me.
Oh, that's cool. Are you asked for permission or beg for forgiveness?
I'm neither. As a matter of fact, just kind of go ahead and do things. And if somebody gets really upset, I may or may not pay attention to them. But over the years, I've kind of learned what my boundaries are. So I generally stay out of trouble. And if I don't, I attempt to attack that with a small amount of humor. It usually works.
Brian, the pandemic has taught us all kinds of new things about ourselves, new things about our friends, new things about our business, new things about our job. What now, considering all those things you've learned or we've learned through the pandemic, something that we hope our grandchildren never have to experience? What does a person need to be happy?
Well, that's such an individual thing. I fully, for some people, they will only be happy when they have as much money as they possibly can. So I can only answer for what makes me happy. And that is, being at a point where I am now, where all my adult children are off and independent and on their own and no longer leeching off me is a great source of happiness. Um, the fact that I have somebody I can come home to every day, and she'll kind of understand if I'm not quite all there, and just kind of enough to do the things that we like to do. We always consider that we've been very, very fortunate, and I don't get to be the judge of somebody else's happiness.
Yeah, interesting. That's very typically Brian Bourke. Um, but I think, to some degree, what makes me happy is listening to Kitchener Today with Brian Bourke, afternoons on 570 News. I think you've brought a fantastic flavor to that show. You're such a human being. And I think people are coming to realize that. And I certainly appreciate what you do every single day for us listeners, but also for your passion about our region. And I think that's what comes across very strongly in each one of your shows. You love your community, you love your job, and you love the people in it. So, Brian, thanks for taking this time to join us this morning and talk with us about things that are important to you and maybe important to us too.
No worries. Appreciate the time, guys.
Okay, great.
All right. Take care.
Thanks very much, folks. We'll see you next Wednesday, Chamber Chat. Have a good week.